How many reports of Sasquatch sightings happened this month in Northeast Ohio? And is the U.S. government doing more to understand Havana Syndrome than we initially thought? I'm Ryan Geckner, and I'm here with Chris Daly.
Could a new film premiered at South by Southwest deliver the final verdict on the Patterson-Gimlin film? What can we say about Three Eye Atlas as it fades away past Jupiter? This is Headlines from the Beyond.
Welcome back, everyone, to this week's edition of Headlines from the Beyond. We've got some really exciting stories this week that are kind of all over the place in the world of the paranormal, so that's kind of fun. So let's start with what's going on in Northeast Ohio. So Sasquatch researchers are calling a slew of recent sightings the latest Bigfoot flap. From March 6th to the 10th, researchers with the Bigfoot Society podcast received 8 reports across Portage and Trumbull counties in Northeast Ohio. For anyone who's not familiar with Ohio, that is the extreme northeast corner of the state. Trumbull County is the county that borders Pennsylvania, just in case you want to get a sense of where we're talking. Across these reports, witnesses describe individuals varying from 6 to 8 feet tall and having brown or black hair. Now, these reports include lots of things, including the typical sightings in wooded areas, also hearing the creature grunt and move through the woods. There was recovery of footprints at one of the sightings and a reported road crossing where the Sasquatch was walking into oncoming traffic. And one witness, I think it's worth pointing out, is a self-proclaimed skeptic, which is a really common occurrence among Sasquatch witnesses. So it's not just a bunch of people who are obsessed with Bigfoot that saw him. Now, full sighting details are linked at the Bigfoot Society's website in our show notes, and we'll keep an eye on these as the sightings are still being actively investigated by Glenn Adkins of the Ohio Squatch Project.
So you said that one of these sightings involved a Bigfoot crossing a road into traffic?
Yes, yeah. So one of the sightings was a woman and her daughter were driving. I forget where they were driving, but the Sasquatch came into the road and then walked into oncoming traffic. And if I remember right, that report, they claimed that had her window been down, she could have reached out and touched the thing. So they were very close.
Because that immediately sends my mind towards, were there any accidents?
Yeah, and well, and that's, the report that we had a couple of months ago in Pennsylvania with the sighting on the road. Like it surprises me when these sightings happen, particularly in a road crossing, that there aren't more people that are like, "Oh yeah, I saw that too." Because they're
Yeah.
usually not, I mean, sometimes they are, but like at least in these two cases, they weren't just like back roads somewhere. They were like main major highways. So it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it always makes me wonder what's going on there.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And it's also interesting that these sightings always seem to happen just to any random person. Like you mentioned, there's always a
Hmm.
skeptic involved, things like that. And yet people
Hmm.
go out and try to find Sasquatch in these areas all the time
Yeah.
and don't get
Hmm.
these great sightings. So
Yep. Yeah, it's
frustrating.
interesting. It is.
Let's talk a little bit about Havana Syndrome, which we've talked about before.
A lot. There's been lots of news about Havana Syndrome this
Yeah,
year.
the more I read about this, the more I watch videos, the more I think we need a full episode
I think
on
so.
Havana Syndrome to really delve into the history of this. There's just so much to it.
Hmm.
But what we're getting right now are some updates on the government's efforts to get to the bottom of this. So
Yeah.
on 60 Minutes, on I believe it was the 9th,
Hmm.
60 Minutes did a kind of a half-hour feature on Havana Syndrome and really what's called anomalous health incidents. So the CIA doesn't refer to this as Havana Syndrome. They refer to this as anomalous health incidents, or AHI. So that's just a difference in terminology, but we are talking about what we know as Havana Syndrome. So, in addition to some new stories from victims and a detailed interview with Stanford's Dr. David Relman, he's the researcher who was tasked by the government to lead 2 investigations into these phenomena. We also got to hear from a former CIA official who worked on the AHI task force. Now, this individual left because of his distrust in the organization's interest in taking victims seriously and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. So that I find really interesting, that here's someone
Hmm.
who was working on this and was just like, you know what, I can't do it anymore. I got to leave. And that says a lot because a lot of these folks who work for the CIA are very entrenched in it and worked for
Yeah.
them for decades and decades. And so hearing that was the first thing that kind of made me say, wow, something's interesting in this piece. Uh,
Yeah, they kept mentioning that like there's this sort of mantra in the CIA that they put their people first. And everyone kept saying, everyone who was affiliated with the CIA in the interviews, like, yeah, we say that, but the way we're handling this speaks to the contrary.
but not this time. Most of the time
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah, most of the time.
This time we're not. Some of the other interesting things that were in there, there were some really interesting, I think, discussions with people who have been targets of
Hmm.
attacks that have led to Havana syndrome, and just listening to kind of some of the symptoms that they describe and things. And we've heard all of those before, but listening to these individuals, I thought was really impactful the way that they did it. So that was nice to see. But the really interesting piece of this was the description of a device
Hmm.
that was acquired, we'll say acquired,
Yeah,
by the
acquired.
Department of Homeland Security. And so this device, and I think, we've mentioned it before that we thought
Yep.
that there was something going on here, but it was recovered in 2024. So it's been investigated for a while. So they've been kind of trying to take a look at it, see what it does, all of that. But here's a description according to 60 Minutes, and they just kept saying their sources,
Hmm.
whoever that is.
Which made it so
Journalists can do that
mysterious.
all the time.
Yes.
Academics can't do that. We don't get to
No.
say our sources and not say who they were.
Yeah. It's kind of,
Uh,
well, we
we
kind of do in
despite
a
things.
sort of backhanded way. We just like make up fake names for people and vague descriptions.
Yeah, we de-identify things, but if I'm going to
Yes.
cite something, it's in my references section.
True. Yes. Yes.
Anyway,
My sources.
all
I'm going
right.
to use that in my next paper.
So the device does not look like a gun. It's designed to be concealed and is small enough to be carried on a person. It is silent, does not create heat. It's programmable for different scenarios, is operated by remote control. It has a range of several hundred feet, can penetrate windows and drywall, and it's a microwave device, so it's
Hmm.
these waves going through. The vital components of it were made in Russia, though at a few points they said Soviet Union, so I don't know how far back this is actually going, because
Yeah.
they did
Yeah.
make mention of the Soviet Union. So the key to its operation is the software, not the hardware. And it allows it to create this unique electromagnetic wave that rises and falls abruptly and pulses rapidly. So this is terrifying for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Um, it has a range of several hundred feet. That's
Hmm.
pretty far. And it
Yeah.
can go through walls and things and
Yeah.
target people.
I think of the characteristics of the device that really got me was the remote controlled aspect.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think there's been like a lot of the discussion around AHI and Havana syndrome has been about like some covert operative who's pointing a device at someone who can see them through a window or something. And it's like, no, actually, they may have set this up in a hotel across the street 4 days ago and just pointed it at your bed and then just decided to hit the button. And
Yeah.
that bothers me. I don't like that part.
No, I don't like this at all. So that's frightening. And there were also some new cases mentioned.
Hmm.
So as they talk about all of this, we learn about more and more people who have evidently been targeted by this device in multiple places around the world, all
Yeah.
different CIA operatives and things like that. So the device itself has been tested on a US military base for more than a year. And they did some tests on sheep and on rats. And what they found was that they showed similar injuries to those in Havana syndrome.
Hmm.
And so some of the scary types of things you're seeing are cognitive impacts, some damage to ears and inner ear, that sort of thing. Lots of pain, people talking about a lot of different kinds of
Yeah.
pain, disorientation, vertigo. So there's a lot of different things that are happening when you're targeted, and it seems like this device makes sense of it all.
Right.
Like that this is likely where it's coming from. And so that's terrifying, as I said.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
So they've talked a little bit about some possible attacks at CIA headquarters and at least two incidents on the grounds of the White House.
Yeah,
So,
they just dropped that in there and then just
yeah,
kind of moved on. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Can we back that up? I need to know more details
let
about
me
this.
rewind.
Yeah, hold on. Run that back for me.
Because that's very, that's US soil, that's the White House. Where supposedly
Hmm.
these places are very secure, and so this device it doesn't have to be inside. So it
Right.
doesn't so you can get through those secure locations.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is again US soil. We've talked about this before in terms of places globally,
Yeah.
and we are seeing it happening here too. So the government has begun compiling security camera footage from all around the world, showing Americans being targeted by what is assumed to be this or a similar device.
The videos are classified, but they were described to us. In one, a camera in a restaurant in Istanbul captured two FBI agents on vacation sitting at a table with their families. A man with a backpack walks in, and suddenly, everyone at the table grabs their head as if in pain. Our sources say another video comes from a stairwell in the U.S. Embassy in Vienna. The stairs lead to a secure facility. In the video, two people on the stairs suddenly collapse.
So, according to 60 Minutes and their sources, the people who were investigating the phenomenon are now being transferred to a unit that develops new weapons. So, we're not
Yeah.
just investigating anomalous health stuff now. Now we're looking at developing new weapons. So, this could be a whole new type of warfare
Yeah.
that we see more and more of.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that really stuck out to me in the piece was they talked about how much these cases of anomalous health incidents are disrupting like CIA and State Department operations, and that people are moving their families out when they're stationed somewhere. They're like, yeah, no, I'm gonna like move my whole family out and I'm just gonna be here, or I'm gonna cut my deployment short, or however, whatever they're talking about. And I found that really interesting. And the pieces of the security camera footage, explaining how it's not just people being attacked, in their hotel rooms or in their offices when they're out on, assignment somewhere. I found that to be pretty wild.
Yeah, people are worried about their families. And once you start seeing that, there's something really bad happening. Many
Yeah.
people are willing to put themselves at risk, and like you said, they have their families leave. But once you start doing that,
Hmm.
that opens up a whole new way of understanding something.
Yeah. So last year, the Age of Disclosure took the South by Southwest Film Festival by storm. This year, another paranormal film, this time investigating the infamous Patterson-Gimlin film, is making similar waves. So if you follow anything related to Sasquatch research on social media, you have more than likely heard about this. But unless you've been living under a rock since 1967, the Patterson-Gimlin film represents probably, in my opinion, the most influential single piece of evidence in the search for Sasquatch. Regardless of what you think about in terms of whether it's real or not, I don't think there's another piece of evidence that has had more influence on the way we think about Sasquatch than this tiny clip of film. Now, the makers of the documentary Capturing Bigfoot call the Patterson-Gimlin film, quote, a definitive hoax, and claim that they have the evidence to prove it. So, filmmaker Mark Evans received a previously undeveloped canister of 16 millimeter film from a woman whose family is kind of tangentially connected to the original Patterson-Gimlin film that he claims shows what he describes as a 1966 practice run of the infamous film a year before the Patterson-Gimlin film's release. And so in this 40-second clip, it appears to show what Evans describes as a slightly skinnier Bigfoot walking into the woods at a location that appears similar to Bluff Creek, which is where the original film was filmed. The film also details not only this newly discovered footage, but follows Evans' investigation into the story of Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin's film, including interviews with Patterson's son Clint and Bob Hieronymus, who previously confessed to being the man in the suit, which, if you followed any of the story around the Patterson-Gimlin film and the attempts to debunk it, Bob Hieronymus's name is probably pretty familiar. Now, it'll be interesting to see how the Sasquatch community reacts to this, as some of these claims, like I said, with Hieronymus, are major points of contention in the community. And the one thing that I find most interesting is that most people have not even seen this film, and let alone, and because of that, have not seen the 40-second clip in question, because it's only aired at South by Southwest. Evan says they're currently working to secure streaming rights for the film, so we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that because I want to see this 40 seconds. So
Oh,
we'll have,
absolutely.
yeah, so we'll have to hold our final verdict until the film is widely available. But I've been in some conversations with folks on Instagram about this, and I kind of am of the opinion that I guess I don't care so much if one single piece of evidence is fake, and particularly this one, in the sense that, like I said, I don't think there's a single other piece of evidence that has been more influential. So if we can think, I don't think we can point to anything that has probably made more people want to go out and look for Sasquatch than the Patterson-Gimlin film. And think about all of the evidence that's been collected because of that. So even if it was fake, it probably led to us finding some legit stuff anyways. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I'm interested to see this film and the skinnier Bigfoot. Maybe
I know, I
Bigfoot
want to
just
see the skinny
gained some
foot, you
weight. Come
know?
on.
Yeah.
And speaking of influential things that are driving people towards studying things, let's talk about Three Eye Atlas one more time.
Yes.
We won't keep going back to this, leaving our solar system. So we thought it'd be good to.
Unless it turns around and comes back, I mean,
If it
then
turns around and comes back, I feel like that's pretty good evidence that it is not a natural interstellar comet.
this is going to become a Three Eye Atlas podcast, folks.
Right, exactly. We'll just focus on that and really try to get Avi Loeb on here. Three Eye Atlas made its closest pass to Jupiter earlier this week and is now headed out away from our solar system. So I wanted to just kind of talk about the 22 anomalies, 22 that Avi Loeb has talked about that make us think, well, maybe there's something different about this object. And I just really want to highlight that there are 22 different anomalies. So as I go through these, think about, well, any one of them is statistically unlikely. And that's why he brings them up. These are all things that are really unlikely. But there's 22 of them. So that's a lot of unlikely. And, we're talking very, very, very small percentages of why this might be happening naturally. Doesn't mean it's not a natural comet. So first one is what's called a mass budget discrepancy. So the expected mass of a nucleus the nucleus of a comet is based on the observed size and the coma activity, the gas and dust that kind of surrounds it. In this case, it is much larger than the actual physical mass that we think Three Eye Atlas has. And that helps you kind of think about the structure of the nucleus. But it's such a discrepancy that it's not something we've really seen before in terms of that much of a discrepancy. So that's the first thing. Then there are 10 geometric rarities. So 10 different things geometrically. So first off, we've talked about most of these before, but the retrograde trajectory is aligned to within 5 degrees of the orbital plane of planets around the sun. The Milky Way disk itself is actually misaligned with the ecliptic plane by about 60 degrees. So the fact that it's coming in within 5 degrees of that plane is interesting. So was this planned? Was this a planned trajectory? Now, its arrival, or Three Eye Atlas's arrival, put it 29 million kilometers from Mars and 54 million kilometers from Jupiter. It was also unobservable from Earth at its perihelion. So again, that's interesting. It's coming close to some big planets, and when it comes by us, it's not observable. Its distance from Jupiter was very close to Jupiter's Hill radius. And if you're unfamiliar with the Hill radius, this is the distance around a planet or other object where its own gravity dominates the attraction of objects over a more distant body like the sun. So, the sun is huge, and it obviously has a gravitational pull, but when you get close into a planet, that planet has more pull than the sun. And so if you wanted to drop off some technology or drop off something to orbit a planet, you want to be within the Hill radius. And 3i Atlas was very close to that Hill radius. So it's possible something was going on there.
Mhm.
We talked a lot about the anti-tail. But before perihelion, it was a jet towards the sun about 10 times longer than it is wide. Post perihelion, it was still the same. So it was still an anti-tail. That's interesting as it moves past the sun to continue to have that anti-tail. If it were a natural comet, we don't know of any where that's really true. So that's interesting. If it were a technological object, that beam of particles might be used to block the solar wind from impacting the nucleus. So there's reason for why that anti-tail might be important if it were a technological object, and it hasn't been seen in natural objects. It's also interesting that the veil of dust around 3i Atlas is just of the right column needed to block the sunlight from hitting the nucleus surface. So it's just perfectly blocking things, which again, that it could be natural. Absolutely, I'm not saying this is alien tech, but it's interesting that that's what's happening. Now, the initial rotation, I want you to listen to some of the numbers over the next few anomalies that I'm going to talk about, because they're all 8s and 16s, which is interesting. So 8 and double 8.
We're going to get a numerologist on the podcast to tell us
I
the
know, right? We need
significance.
that. So the initial rotation was aligned to within 8 degrees with the sunward direction on entry into the solar system. So as it comes in, it's within 8 degrees with sunward direction. And then you have a wobble. We've talked about the wobble that it had, which made it kind of look odd as they were able to see it on really high magnification. But the wobble of the pre-perihelion anti-tail in the direction of the sun required the base of the jet to be within 8 degrees from the sun-facing pole. So in order to see that happen, you had to be within 8 degrees. So that's interesting. Again, this 8 degrees, apparently 8 degrees is really important. I need an astrophysicist to tell me why 8 degrees is so important.
You track down the astrophysicist and I'll track down the numerologist.
All right.
And then we'll just bring them on the podcast and have them duke it out.
And have them talk together.
That's right.
So there was a sunward anti-tail jet, again, both before and after perihelion. But interestingly, it reversed direction at perihelion relative to the direction of motion. So somehow it's reversing things now. This seems like a lot of odd behavior, for a natural object. Okay, so going back to this post-perihelion anti-tail, the launch base of it was on the night side of 3i Atlas. And that was both before perihelion and after. So it stays on the dark side, stays on the night side of the comet, which again, pieces of it are changing, others are not. This doesn't seem like a natural rotation, though of course it can be, but it doesn't seem that way. The gravitational deflection of 3i Atlas by 16 degrees at perihelion is exactly twice the opening angle of the anti-tail before perihelion, so exactly twice. So this particular coincidence allows the wobbling jet around the rotation to generate that anti-tail in the direction of the sun before perihelion, and a counterjet on the opposite pole after perihelion. The jet opening angle is 8 degrees on both poles. So you have these angles that are the same on opposite poles pre and post. That feels like something you might do very purposefully.
Yeah.
So finally, in this set of anomalies, on January 22nd, 3i Atlas aligned with the Sun-Earth axis to within an extraordinary small angle. And this is less than 1 degree, so 0.69 degrees. So it's aligning almost exactly. And at that time, its anti-tail pointed at Earth. Now we get into the technosignatures, or possible technosignatures. Again, there's 22 anomalies here. 3i Atlas arrived from a direction coincident with the radio wow signal to 9 degrees. If you're not familiar with the wow signal, we'll link to a short video in the show notes. But this is a 72-second narrowband radio signal that was detected back on August 15th, 1977 by Ohio State University's Big Ear Telescope, which is no longer in use. It hasn't been in use for quite a while now, but in the 70s, that's when it was in use. And the signal came from somewhere in Sagittarius, and it matched frequencies near neutral hydrogen, which suggests an artificial origin. So the wow signal is a big deal. And kind of like we were talking about with the Patterson-Gimlin film, that signal prompted it prompted SETI. It prompted all of this exploration of finding radio signals like this. So even if the wow signal was not technological in origin, it still prompted huge amounts of study and is very important. And that's where Atlas 3i or 3i Atlas came from. Same general direction. Also, there's a system of 3 mini jets, which are symmetrically separated by exactly 120 degrees from each other. So that's interesting.
So weird.
Right?
So weird.
As I go through these and as I was listing them all out, I was like, oh my God, listen to this.
That's so weird.
Also possible technosignature, the non-gravitational acceleration was not directed away from the sun, but had a substantial sideways component.
Okay.
So again, that's not what you would expect. It's different than what you would expect. Then we get into the composition anomalies of this thing. So before perihelion, we kind of examined the gas plume that surrounds it. It contained a lot more nickel than iron. That is typically found in industrial produced nickel alloys, not in natural environments. There was also a nickel to cyanide ratio that is orders of magnitude larger, than for thousands of known comets. And again, we know that this is interstellar, so there might be differences, but that's interesting. The anti-tail penetrated hundreds of thousands of kilometers through the solar wind and solar radiation. In order to not be stopped, the dust particles must be larger than common tiny particles or submicron particles of interstellar dust. So we have to see larger particles than we would normally see. However, if the particles are bigger than a millimeter, they have to carry an untenable amount of mass in order to account for 99% of the scattered sunlight around 3i Atlas, which is what's observed in the Hubble images. So we don't understand these particles. They don't make sense either. There were also icy fragments around 3i Atlas before perihelion. But afterwards, that signature of ice, the spectral signature of ice, disappeared. So it goes past the sun and that signature of ice disappears. And we saw some interesting organic molecules in the gas phase. There was also an enhancement by a factor of about 20 in the water production rate. So ice coming off, water production. To survive this kind of bombardment along an interstellar journey over what's probably billions of years, the organic molecules must have been buried under a thick layer of material, at least 10 meters in depth. So regardless of if this is showing us anything about life on 3i Atlas, that's really interesting that there are organic molecules in there. It says something about what may have been happening, a billion years ago or billions of years ago, in some distant part of the galaxy, which is, interesting. I just keep saying, well, that's interesting.
That's interesting. It is. All of this is interesting.
The isotope abundances of hydrogen and carbon are markedly different from solar system comets. Not surprising given it's interstellar. And they suggest a rare birth environment with a freezing temperature of less than 30 degrees Kelvin and low metallics. So it suggests a really interesting, different birth environment, which again, it is an interstellar comet. So it might be telling us something about a distant region of space. All right, possible biosignatures. The volatility of methane is between carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. Yet, methane was detected in the gas plume only after perihelion. Both carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide were detected before perihelion.
Hmm.
So that's odd. You should see all three of those.
Same time,
If
yeah.
the volatility of methane's in between those other two, if you see the other two, you should also see methane. And yet it was only detected after. So that means there's some kind of strange layered composition to the nucleus. Just if you're not familiar, methane and other organic molecules are known biomarkers. So meaning potentially some sort of life. Okay, the final three anomalies:
Mhm.
unusually high mass, speed, polarization, and perihelion brightening. So the nucleus of 3I Atlas is more massive than any of the other interstellar objects that we know of, and was also moving faster than both. You would expect a lower mass to move faster. 3I Atlas shows extreme negative polarization, which is unprecedented for all known comets. This unusual polarization may be related to that weird anti-tail. Finally, the 22nd anomaly.
Mhm.
Near perihelion, 3I Atlas brightened faster than any known comet and was bluer than the sun.
Hmm.
So that's 22 anomalies. Again, it's the third interstellar object. So we don't know a lot about these things. So it could be
Mhm.
that we're going to have 20 more of these things in the next year, and they're all going to be very similar. That's
Mhm.
going to surprise me, but it could
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Because we're really just now starting to be able to see some of these interstellar objects coming through. They've always been there, but we haven't been able
Mhm.
to learn much about them. So, Ryan, what does that tell you about this thing?
Man, it's weird. That's what it tells
Right?
me. It was weird, right? And I think back to our early episodes on 3i Atlas and just how much sureness the sort of mainstream physicists and astrophysicists had around 3i Atlas. And I don't think they would have predicted I don't think they would have predicted 22 of these things for sure. And so I think to me the big thing is kind of this was our takeaway I think from that series too was like you've got to check your assumptions at the door when you're looking at something that you've only seen three of, like you can't assume that it's anything. And I mean I think it's weird. There was some news this week that I saw about some physicists speculating about the possibility for Jupiter to hold life, and it's like, well, 3i Atlas passed pretty close to Jupiter. What's that mean? It's
Yeah.
like it's pretty crazy. But yeah, I think you can't assume that you know the things about the thing that you know nothing about. I mean that's should go without saying, but apparently not.
Well, it should, but we don't like to do that.
Yeah, no.
We like to pretend we know everything about everything. And,
Right.
as we look at all of this, I have to say, there's so much we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And keep your minds open. We say this all the time, right? Like,
Yep.
keep your mind open to all the possibilities that are out there. I have no idea what 3i Atlas is, and I know it's leaving us, but it still exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it is still something, and it may very well be a natural comet,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a really weird one
A weird one. Yep.
with a lot of different properties than what we're used to seeing. And some of those properties really do lend themselves to the potential for it being alien tech or,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even something organic in there.
Yep. Yep. Well, thank you for listening as we continue to follow the stories of the strange and the uncanny. This has been Headlines from the Beyond.